Okay, so let's unpack this. We're starting today with a really challenging intellectual journey. It's built around a deceptively simple question,
Deceptively is the right word.
and it's also deeply provocative. And that question is the act of staying home, of, settling down,
hmm
is it fundamentally bad for your brain?
And we're not just talking about, feeling a bit sluggish or missing a workout.
No, not at all.
This goes much, much deeper. We're getting into a philosophical argument that this lack of movement, it might fundamentally conflict with our deepest neurobiological design.
Yeah, this is a deep dive into the philosophy of, what, inertia.
Yeah.
And it's surprisingly radical when you get into it.
It is. We're using a short but incredibly powerful philosophical dialogue. It's called Misuse. And we also have the intellectual analysis that goes along with it. And these are our primary sources.
And this text, it takes the idea of staying put, what it calls sedentism, and just expands it into this huge, comprehensive critique of modern cognitive function and almost unbelievably of civilization itself.
It really goes there.
Our mission today is to take a shortcut through this pretty profound philosophical and neurobiological criticism. We're exploring the concept that sedentism, or Sichaftigkeit as it's called in the original German,
Right.
it's far more than just where you happen to live geographically. The argument is that it's a profound, deep-seated mental and cultural pathology.
A pathology that results from what the source material just keeps calling a misuse of our own thinking organ.
And that concept, that word misuse.
Zweckentfremdung.
Right. Can you break that down? It's a rich term.
It is. It means more than just misuse. It's like misappropriation or a deviation from an intended purpose, using something for a function it was never designed for.
Okay, so that's the anchor we need to hold on to.
Exactly. Because the core thesis is this. Sedentism constitutes a deep form of this misuse of the human nervous system, and this act of just being static, it leads inexorably toward mental stagnation, the generation of internal neurosis, and then ultimately cultural overregulation.
So, okay, we are wrestling with this astonishing, really radical notion. The idea that all the bureaucratic hurdles, the endless regulations, the complicated social norms we all struggle with every single day, they might not be the pinnacle of societal progress at all.
But rather the exact opposite.
Right. The elaborate external symptoms of a kind of collective cognitive illness that's born from simply sitting still for too long.
So if you've ever felt trapped by red tape or just pointless rules at work or wherever,
Yeah.
this source is suggesting that what you might be feeling is the societal effect of widespread chronic boredom.
That's a huge claim.
It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. What if the entire project of complex, high-density civilization isn't a triumph of organization at all, but a massive defense mechanism, one that we've built to contain the chaotic mental energy of billions of brains that are all operating outside of their evolutionary design parameters?
Phew. Okay. That's a lot to start with.
It is.
So the dialogue itself, this text called Misuse, it immediately draws you in. I found it so approachable.
It is. It's written in a very simple conversational style. It almost feels like a philosophical game between two friends just talking.
And the very first line, it just establishes the central conflict right away. The first character asks, "Have you been anywhere today?"
And the reply is this kind of uncomfortable truth. It's almost a confession of a deviation from the norm. He says, "No, today was a day of sedentism."
A day of sedentism. Notice how the text treats this. It's not just a passive state, like resting.
No.
It's an active, observable event, a specific condition in your life that you have to acknowledge.
Yeah, you have to name it. And the character who receives that answer is immediately dismissive, just totally unimpressed.
And that pushback, that little bit of dialogue, it contains the entire premise of the critique. He says, "That doesn't sound good at all. We're not really designed for that."
And that's the core claim right out of the gate.
Right there in the first few lines.
The idea that the sedentary lifestyle is not just a modern preference or, a matter of comfort, it's a flat-out denial of our fundamental evolutionary design.
And to understand why it's a denial, we have to look at how the text defines movement or mobilitary.
Exactly. This is where the idea elevates from just, physical exercise to something much, much deeper.
Yeah, the analysis insists that movement isn't just about getting from point A to point B for convenience. It's what's the term? An epistemological principle.
It sounds academic, I know.
It does. So let's break that down for you listening. When you say epistemological principle, you mean that movement is essentially a necessary method for us to know the world. Is that it?
That's it, exactly. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. It's how we know what we know. And the text argues that the human nervous system is optimized, it's built, to acquire knowledge through spatial and physical engagement with the world.
So our ancestors, they learned about the world resources, threats, navigation, physics, everything, by constantly roaming and interacting with it.
That was the school. The world was the school.
And the purpose of this roaming is stated so perfectly in the source material. It creates this powerful, self-reinforcing loop that just defines the mobile existence.
Yes, the dial captures it perfectly.
It says, after all, we are supposed to roam the world and learn it in the process. And we use what we have learned to roam the world even better and more extensively in order to learn the world even better.
I mean, that's a massive claim, because it turns learning into the engine of movement, and movement becomes the output of learning.
A dynamic, constant cycle.
It is. Movement generates sensory and cognitive input. That input then necessitates structural changes in the brain. That's what learning is.
Right.
And that learning improves our capacity to move and adapt, which then generates more input, and it just goes on and on.
So if you're a hunter-gatherer, the more you successfully roam and learn where the water is or how the seasons change, the better equipped your brain is, both structurally and intellectually, to roam even further the next time and to survive more effectively. Mobility equals continuous adaptation.
And this sets up the inescapable core dichotomy of this whole deep dive. Mobility is this endless cycle of learning, adaptation, and growth, which translates directly into structural change in our nervous system.
And sedentism, by that definition, is just the cessation of that fundamental evolutionary cycle.
It is, by its very nature, an anti-epistemological stance. It's a choice to stop using the world as the primary input for your own growth.
And when you think about that against the backdrop of human history, the sheer scale of that choice becomes so apparent.
Just staggering.
For what, 95% of our history, the human brain was literally optimized by this cycle of movement.
To deliberately stop acquiring new knowledge about physical space or resources or social dynamics by staying still, that meant risking rapid death.
Yeah.
The brain that evolved was one that needed constant, novel external information to survive.
Therefore, if the essential mechanism of human cognitive existence is the acquisition of knowledge through spatial and physical engagement,
Which is the argument.
then to choose non-engagement, to confess today was a day of sedentism, is truly an admission that you are operating outside the very parameters for which your nervous system was optimized.
It's a confession, an admission of misuse.
So this philosophical critique, it now moves pretty seamlessly into the neurobiological argument, which I think is what gives this misuse text so much weight.
It's the scientific underpinning, yeah.
The text argues that movement isn't just good for the body, it is mandatory for the brain. And it highlights the sheer scale of the internal work that movement requires.
There's a great line. The speaker says, "Are you actually aware of the gigantic amount of structural change we're causing in the process?"
This is the moment where the dialogue grounds itself in, modern neuroscience. When the other character asks, "You mean in the brain?" Sure. The text is explicitly linking movement, learning, and physical engagement to neuroplasticity.
To the literal, continuous remodeling of the brain's physical structure.
We tend to use that term neuroplasticity pretty broadly. Maybe thinking about, recovering from a stroke or learning a new language.
Right, as a special event.
Exactly. But the text treats it as the absolute baseline requirement of just existing.
It's not a feature, it's the core function.
It argues that the cumulative effect of constant movement, wandering, negotiating terrain, reacting to novelty, hunting, gathering, is a gigantic amount of structural change that's required just to maintain functional health.
And this structural change isn't just a byproduct. It's not an accident. It is the brain's fundamental job.
The human brain, which ballooned in size during our nomadic phases, is built for dynamic, unpredictable inputs.
The dialogue states it so plainly. And the brain is practically crying out for structural changes.
Crying out, that's such a visceral phrase, isn't it? It really is. It suggests that if we don't provide the external inputs that are necessary for physical structural change, if we don't force it to map new spaces or solve real-world dynamic problems, The brain isn't just underutilized, it enters a state of genuine distress.
It's an organ designed for incredibly complex, high-demand processing that needs novelty and challenge just to maintain its own function.
And this point is strongly supported by the analysis's reference to contemporary neurobiology.
Specifically the work of Gerald Huther.
Right.
Huther is a prominent neurobiologist, and he emphasizes that the brain only truly unfolds its potential. It only sustains massive plasticity through active stimulation, through confronting novel challenges, and through continuous social and environmental interaction.
So if the brain isn't driven to change its structure through external demands, like, say, mapping a new valley or learning a new skill to survive,
then its potential is either just locked away or, even worse, the internal system starts running idle.
the source suggests the system might even begin to degrade because its core function has been denied.
Think of it this way. Your brain is a massive parallel processor, right? It's designed to take in millions of unique sensory inputs every hour. The wind, the texture of the soil under your feet, the sound of an animal, the movement of the sun.
All that data.
It processes this dynamic chaos and generates adaptive action. But if you sit at a desk in a climate-controlled room staring at a static screen,
Which is most of us, a lot of the time.
the vast majority of that sensory intake is repetitive and unchanging. The input demands become two-dimensional and predictable.
The brain evolved to solve the problem of where is the food and where is the danger in a constantly shifting high-stakes environment.
Right.
And now, for many of us, the problem it solves is, where is that email? Or how do I navigate this software update?
The structural demands are exponentially reduced.
Yeah.
But the processing capacity, that remains.
And that mismatch, that huge reduction in structural demand, that creates the void where this misuse really takes hold.
If the brain is literally crying out for genuine novelty and structural challenges, and all we're giving it is repetition, routine, and predictable filtered information, it must find something else to do with that vast, unused processing power.
It fills the vacuum with internal noise.
And that has consequences.
So if we accept this premise, I mean, the implications for modern life are just huge. If you're a desk worker, if you're following predictable urban routines,
This suggests that your professional life might fundamentally conflict with your deepest biological programming.
the daily commute, the standardized office, the static environment, these are all forms of structural stillness that deny the brain its evolutionary fuel.
And we should remember the brain evolved to optimize for movement and survival. It's not just about learning facts, it's about making real-time, high-stakes decisions based on fluid environmental data.
When we remove that fluid environment, we take away the brain's greatest challenge.
And the analysis suggests the consequences are immediate and they are internal. Which brings us to the core pathology that results from this cognitive mismatch. When that massive, crying need for structural change goes unfulfilled, when the brain is denied the dynamic environment it was built for, that is the moment the pathological misuse is fully realized.
And the symptom of that pathology is the dialogue's really memorable and laconic phrase.
Yeah.
I know exactly what happens then. You start having stupid thoughts.
We have to be careful here, though.
Right.
Stupid thoughts, or Dummgedenken, it's an ironic, almost poetic expression in the source material.
It's not literal.
No. The analysis defines this concept not as simple forgetfulness or, minor mistakes. It's the complex, sometimes devastating result of a serious maladaptation.
Okay, so what exactly falls under this umbrella of stupid thoughts?
Well, the text suggests it encompasses a few things. First, chronic, pervasive boredom, or long while.
Okay.
The creation of useless, circular, neurotic thought chains, the development of private anxieties and paranoia.
Things spinning in your head.
Exactly. And, most significantly, the generation of culturally overregulated and self-referential thought systems.
Fundamentally, then, it's the consequence of a vast energy surplus within the nervous system.
Precisely. The brain, which is optimized for complex external output, like planning a long migratory route or negotiating social status in a fluid group, is suddenly without meaningful external work.
This creates what the analysis calls cognitive overpressure.
That metaphor of cognitive overpressure is perfect, isn't it?
It really is. We have this massive high-performance engine running at capacity, but the transmission is disengaged because there's nowhere novel to go.
So the energy has to go somewhere.
And instead of productive external change, it becomes internal heat and noise.
Precisely. Imagine a pressure vessel. The brain is continually generating mental energy and processing power, but the necessary external activity that would open the valve and release that energy in productive structural changes is shut off by sedentism.
The pressure just builds and builds.
And that pressure manifests as chaotic, unproductive, internal system noise, the stupid thoughts.
And crucially, these thoughts are maladaptive. They don't help you survive or learn or adapt better. They trap you. They're mental cul-de-sacs.
We all recognize the feeling, I think.
Oh, absolutely. When we're isolated or inactive and your mind just starts spinning on pointless anxieties, rehearsing old arguments, or obsessing over some minor, insignificant social slight from last week.
That is the internal combustion engine running idle and beginning to overheat.
And what's terrifying, as the analysis points out, is that the energy expenditure on these stupid thoughts can be just as rigorous and consuming as productive thinking.
Yes. A person obsessing over a complex, fabricated interpersonal conflict is using the same powerful hardware that could be used to solve a genuine engineering problem or map a physical terrain.
It's a waste of incredible resources.
A total misapplication. And while this individual neuroticism is problematic enough, the dialogue quickly scales this up to a terrifying societal prospect. And this provides the crucial intellectual bridge to our next section.
Right, the speaker in the dialogue asks, and just imagine that an entire group of people suddenly become sedentary.
And the immediate visceral response from the other character is so telling.
Oh, dear. I'd rather not imagine that.
The fear is immediate and it's profound. If individual pathology leads to private neuroticism and self-obsession, then widespread group sedentism must necessarily lead to a large-scale societal pathology.
So if a single person's overpressurized brain starts producing complex but ultimately useless internal systems, they spend hours designing an unnecessarily complex spreadsheet for a simple task.
Right, we've all seen that.
What happens when millions of overpressurized idle brains all start interacting with each other?
The result, according to this critique, is a culture that is itself fundamentally neurotic. It becomes obsessed with internal self-referential systems, and it becomes excessively complicated.
And that complexity, which is born of internal chaos, it needs management.
It has to be contained.
This is the critical pivot point. If the stupid thoughts are the internal sign of a malfunction, then a society built of malfunctioning brains cannot rely on genuine flexible adaptation.
It can't trust itself.
So it must impose external control to contain the chaos.
And this transition leads us directly to the most radical and, I would argue, the most controversial thesis in the entire source material.
This is where it gets really wild.
It's the idea that large-scale civilization, particularly its dense web of systems, rules, norms, laws, prohibitions, it may not be a sign of success at all, but rather a necessary pathological compensation for widespread cognitive maladaptation caused by the sedentary condition.
I have to push back a little here. I mean, that is an enormous claim.
It is.
We have complex rules because complex societies need traffic laws and tax codes to function, right? Are you really suggesting the U.S. tax code is born of chronic boredom? How does the analysis defend itself against the charge of, being some kind of technological Luddite or romanticizing chaos?
And that is precisely the challenge the source material anticipates. It's a fair question. The distinction it makes is between necessary pragmatic rules and overregulation.
Okay.
The imposition of complexity purely to occupy the idle mind or to stabilize the neurotic one.
The source quote provides the mechanism for this, right?
It does. It says, I suspect that sedentary people need so many rules because of the many stupid thoughts that can arise from applying the nervous system to a situation for which it is not so well suited.
So the rules aren't just for efficiency or for fairness. They're a collective cultural straitjacket.
Yes.
Designed to manage the excess, potentially destructive mental energy of a static population.
So the purpose of the rule shifts. It shifts from solving external problems like where is the water,
right,
to solving internal invented problems like how do we navigate this overly complex permission structure that we ourselves created?
Right. The analysis points out that the sheer volume of bureaucratic process, the endless forms, the arbitrary deadlines, the creation of self-referential administrative roles.
All of it acts as a mechanism to structure, contain, and exhaust the surplus cognitive energy of a sedentary population.
If the mind isn't solving real problems, society gives it fabricated ones to solve.
Just to keep the internal pressure from exploding into anarchy.
The dialogue draws a stark and, I think, really compelling contrast between rule sets.
It does. Issuing prohibitions, the endless, detailed thou shalt nots, the regulatory creep we all experience, is explicitly defined as a characteristic trait of sedentary people.
And conversely, the text claims that such expansive, detailed, and bureaucratic rulemaking is rather unusual among mobile people.
And the hypothesis it proposes for comparison is simple. It says one should simply have to compare the extent of the rules between a sedentary and a mobile group.
And the conclusion is pretty clear from their perspective.
Yeah.
Mobile, nomadic groups who require constant, flexible adaptation to their physical environment, they operate with simple, pragmatic, contextual rules.
Rules focused on immediate survival and necessary social cohesion.
They don't have the luxury of inventing complex, self-referential bureaucracy because they're too busy solving real-world, externally imposed problems.
Their rules govern necessary social interaction, survival, sharing of resources, but they don't generally require an expansive framework to manage inherent boredom or neurotic thought chains.
Because the constant necessity of movement and dynamic environmental engagement acts as a continuous cognitive regulator, it does the job for them.
The world regulates the mind.
Now, let's connect this radical diagnosis to the cultural critique it references in the analysis. It notes that this diagnosis strongly echoes Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yes, specifically his critique of morality in works like Beyond Good and Evil.
How so?
Well, Nietzsche viewed complex morality and civilization, especially what he called ascetic ideals, as a kind of restrictive corset, a structure imposed by weak or sick life forces to suppress natural, vital drives. In the context of misuse, we can map this metaphor directly. The rules are not the suppression of natural vitality itself, but the suppression of the neurotic, useless energy that results when that vitality is denied its proper, mobile outlet.
So the rules police the stupid thoughts created by immobility.
Exactly. It's a difference between a naturally healthy body that needs no restraints and a body that has become weak or clumsy and now needs splints and harnesses to prevent self-injury. The system of morality and rules becomes the societal splint.
We also had to bring in Sigmund Freud's civilization and its discontents.
Or das Unbehagen in der Kultur, yeah. Freud famously argued that civilization arises from what he called instinctual renunciation Triebversicht.
We trade our instinctual freedom, the ability to act purely on desire, for collective security and structure.
And if we integrate the sedentism thesis here, we get a profound reframing of that instinctual sacrifice.
How does it reframe it?
The first, foundational renunciation, is the denial of the instinct to roam, the instinct for continuous physical and cognitive adaptation. That denial is the initial cognitive blockage.
And the endless series of subsequent prohibitions that define modern, urbanized life, from legal codes to corporate policies.
They're simply attempts to manage the resulting internal overpressure from that first great denial.
And looking at anthropology, the analysis cites Marshall Sahlins' critique from Stone Age economics.
A classic. Sahlins challenged the fundamental myth of linear progress, arguing that settling down wasn't necessarily an inherent step forward for humanity.
He introduced the concept of the original affluent society, suggesting that hunter-gatherer life was characterized by meeting needs with minimal effort.
Which resulted in a surprising amount of leisure time and high health outcomes. They worked less than we do, and their structures were simpler.
So if Sahlins is right, and mobility led to a kind of pragmatic affluence and cognitive adaptation,
then the subsequent adoption of dense, sedentary, rule-bound systems looks profoundly less like a technological triumph.
and much more like a collective defense mechanism against an epidemic of internal cognitive collapse.
It's the brain rebelling against its cage. The evolutionary mismatch principle is the unifying framework here. The brain, optimized for dynamic, mobile complexity, becomes a source of pervasive pathology when it's forced into a static, rule-bound, unnatural context, like bureaucratic isolation.
So the rules aren't the sign of progress. They're the elaborate cultural bandages we apply to the chronic wounds of that mismatch.
And this suggests that if we were physically and cognitively mobile, much of the societal machinery we consider necessary would simply dissolve.
Because the underlying internal pressure would just vanish.
Exactly. Given the sheer gravity, and frankly the counterintuitive nature of these claims, that our civilization is built on containing neurosis, we really need to analyze the specific philosophical framework the text uses to deliver this critique.
How it makes its argument.
Exactly. It relies heavily on Socratic irony and dialogue, rather than, say, a dense academic argument.
The use of Socratic irony is brilliant because it serves a dual function, doesn't it?
It does.
By using a casual conversational tone that's reminiscent of Plato's early dialogues, the text doesn't aim to just state a rigid truth. Instead, it invites you, the listener, to participate in the deconstruction of your own cultural certainties.
Exactly. Irony, in this context, is a critical self-reflection strategy. The phrase stupid thoughts is deliberately reductive, it's almost funny.
Yeah.
But it allows the text to discuss deep neurobiological and cultural misalignment without resorting to clinical jargon. Irony is the tool that enables you to realize, maybe with an uncomfortable laugh, that your own default behavior, the desire for routine, the preference for the known, the internal spinning, might be fundamentally flawed or even pathological.
Let's focus again on the core title and concept, misuse. We established that the term refers to zwecken from done, misappropriation, or abuse of purpose.
Right. And that concept is often used in ethics or technology. You talk about misusing a tool or a resource.
But the key to the source's profundity, I think, is that the misused object is not external. It's not a hammer or a law.
It's the subject itself.
It's human thinking, our nervous system, applied improperly.
It is a profound self-critique. We have taken the most complex, dynamically adaptive organ evolved over millions of years, and we've constrained it into an environment of deliberate structural stillness.
That just flips the standard anthropocentric view on its head.
Completely.
We assume we are masters of our environment and our own minds, capable of choosing the best cognitive arrangement. The text suggests we have fundamentally misunderstood the operating manual for our own machinery.
We chose stillness when the manual dictates movement.
Placing this text within its post-humanist and anthropological context really helps us see its place in a broader tradition of self-reflection. The analysis specifically names some influential thinkers.
Yes, thinkers who've explored this tension between stasis and movement, system and flow.
The reference to Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari and their concept of nomadology versus statehood from 1,000 plateaus is especially relevant here.
Oh, absolutely. Their work is a deep dive into the difference between spaces.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. They distinguish between what they call smooth space and striated space. Smooth space is the territory of the nomad. It's open, it's fluid, it allows for perpetual remapping, experimentation, flow.
Okay, open country.
Basically. And striated space is the territory of the state. It's gridded, measured, controlled, and defined by boundaries and rigid fixed coordinates.
A city grid.
A city grid, a spreadsheet, a legal code. And what the misuse text is doing, cognitively speaking, is framing sedentism as the ultimate state-driven condition.
How so?
By denying physical and cognitive movement, we trap the brain in a striated cognitive space. A checklist, a rulebook, a static map of predictable routines. We replace the vast, dynamic world, the smooth space, with a rigid internal system, the striated space.
That's a devastating analogy, the bureaucratic rule sets we were talking about earlier.
They're merely the external manifestation of the internal striated space that the sedentary mind invents to cope with its own lack of novelty.
The nomadic mind, perpetually remapping, requires flexible social rules. The state mind requires fixed, comprehensive law.
Exactly. We also see the influence of Peter Sloterdijk.
Particularly his work on anthropotechniques, the self-forming practices humans use to manage themselves.
Right. We engage in spiritual practices, meditation, or rigorous physical training. These are intentional anthropotechniques aimed at self-improvement or self-mastery.
And Sloterdijk's framework helps us understand sedentism, not just as a failure, but as an unintentional, degenerative anthropotechnique.
We are actively, if unknowingly, enforcing self-constraining practices on our own nervous system.
So we are forcing a self-formation process that results in mental immobility and neurosis, rather than growth and potential unfolding.
And finally, linking this to posthumanist critique, like the kind you find in Catherine Hales or Donna Haraway.
The text suggests a culture that has profoundly ignored its own cognitive and evolutionary foundations.
And the tragedy here, seen in this posthumanist light, is that instead of establishing institutions that reflect adequate, dynamic, and fluid thinking, the kind required for true adaptation, we have established institutions that result from the lack of it.
Our rules are less about adapting to the world
and more about defending ourselves from the internal chaotic energy we generate through our own static existence.
The conclusion drawn from this entire philosophical framework is just piercing. The fundamental misuse is forgetting the essential evolutionary purpose of the nervous system,
which is constant, externally driven structural transformation.
And when we forget that, we establish norms and institutions that are essentially massive self-referential defense mechanisms against our own engineered internal chaos. All right, it's time to bring this deep dive home and synthesize the core argument of misuse.
Let's pull it all together.
To summarize, Sedentism is not merely a benign lifestyle choice. The argument is that it's a mental and neurobiological problem that may be the fundamental engine behind cultural overregulation, excessive bureaucracy, and the explosion of complicated and often pointless rules.
The text functions as a powerful, albeit subtle, plea against mental immobilization. It's an insistent reminder that the original evolutionary purpose of movement is existential self-realization.
A continual process of defining who you are by actively engaging with the dynamic world.
And allowing your internal structure to adapt accordingly.
And the essential connection that ties all these threads together, from the neurobiology of Gerald to the critique of Deleuze, is the final realization we have to carry forward.
And that is, thinking is movement in the deep structural cognitive sense.
If you halt the physical roaming and deny the necessary external inputs, you halt the structural changes.
And the high-performance system begins to malfunction, generating those self-consuming, stupid thoughts.
We evolved for dynamism, for complexity, and for constant novelty.
And the greatest tragedy of civilization, if we're to believe this radical critique, is not our inability to solve external problems. We're technologically brilliant at that.
No, it's our self-imposed constraint that forces us to spend massive amounts of energy solving internal, fabricated, neurotic problems instead.
A huge misallocation of cognitive resources.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to carry forward, something for you to mull on long after this deep dive ends. If the core function of the brain is to enact structural changes through roaming, learning, and physical engagement, we have to ask, what specific modern habits or societal structures constitute the most significant daily misuse of your own thinking organ?
And think specifically about the mental rules and prohibitions you've accepted in your life. The self-imposed norms, the rigid boundaries, the bureaucratic routines you follow without question. And ask yourself, could these be born not of genuine external necessity or rational choice, but merely of collective chronic stagnation?
When was the last time you consciously introduced true disruptive novelty into your routine and challenged your brain to truly roam, structurally and physically, outside that striated map?
Perhaps finding that smooth open space is the only way to silence those stupid thoughts once and for all.